bottom will feel compelled to follow the dictates from the top. So there's this kind of moral and ethical vacuum where they don't and no longer think for themselves. If their commander says, go rape the women, you know, there isn't this reflection of, I don't know if I should. You do what your commander says. And so this sense of entitlement as well. I mean, in many wars, when they claimed a village, the corporal or the leader would say, now you're entitled to the women because you claimed the village. So these things took place throughout history. Impunity. When you think that rape is an assault, it is a torture, and we only had our first convictions in the 1990s associated with the former Yugoslavian crisis and the Rwandan crisis. When you think how long war has existed and we get our first convictions then, it gives you this feeling about what really matters and who really cares. So it's fantastic now that we have had these kind of convictions. And there were a lot of women who had raised to higher positions in the former Yugoslavian crisis. It was a woman judge who said, we need to find out more about these sexual assaults. And then she started to open up, and we saw so many things going on there that we may not have seen in other criminal war tribunals that just talked about torture or the other things that we always associate with war. Intimidation and survival looting, this is something that I found in DRC because there is very little infrastructure and very little control, that even civilians now use rape or the threat of rape to provide for their daily needs. So if they see women coming from their fields, they might threaten or really rape the women just to take the food they have, because poverty is so big a problem there. You with me? So I don't need to tell you how many problems there are with rape. Most people understand that it is a terrible intimate assault and akin to torture. There's mental and physical trauma, and in the Congo situation, they actually coined a phrase of rape with extreme violence, REV, because it wasn't only penetration with penis, but it was often penetration with gun butts. They poured oil into vaginas, they used glass shards. So it was really what one of the newspapers claimed, it was a war on women. So whereas they might kill a soldier, they would rape a woman or try to destroy her reproductive organs. So you can see this gendered approach. Now, men are also raped there, and it is extraordinarily painful and shameful as well. I worked with women because that was the larger majority that I know of, but more and more men are coming forward that they also have been raped, and they're penetrated anally, and they also have some violent glass sticks, etc. So there's a problem with HIV and infertility. Infertility is a real curse in some of these low-income settings, where when you are so impoverished, your riches is your ability to have children. The unwanted pregnancies, abortion is illegal in Congo, and a lot of women attempt their own versions. The stigma and marginalization, that women are actually shunned from the village. And I used to not understand completely why all this was happening. I remember giving a talk one time and someone put their hand up and said, if a man loves his wife, why would he do that? But we have to think in a whole different way when people work in collectives in a war zone. So the men are often afraid that the soldier will come back and claim his wife, so she's like a magnet attracting trouble to him. And he's also very much afraid of HIV. They don't all know enough about it, and there's very few health resources. The impaired carrying capacity I refer to here is when women are the primary caregivers of the elderly or children. When they are incapacitated, then all these other people who depend on them also suffer. Which is why I also put livelihoods and malnutrition here, because the women that I spoke with and worked with and are the biggest targets are rural women. And they're agrarians, so they need to go to their fields every day to collect food to bring back to the family. And if it's very insecure, they may not make those trips. You know, they don't have refrigeration and things. They take the food fresh from the field and then serve it to the children. And the lack of healthcare, like I mentioned, very poor infrastructure. Congo has a long history of 60 years of Belgian colonialism, 30 years of Mobutu, this wicked dictator who made a lot of money and didn't honor the citizens. And then they've had this fledgling democracy, which in this huge country has been unable to stem the violence in the East. So just to give you a picture, has anybody been to Africa? Okay, lots of people. Have you been to Congo? Okay, you have been to Congo. Have you been to the East or the West?
East.
Okay, so were you working in healthcare or?
Yeah, I was with RFSU doing a small evaluation.
Okay, we probably crossed paths. Yeah. Here it is in relation to the continent. It's called the Heart of Africa. And it's a huge country. It's the size of Western Europe. And I was here in Bukavu, which is 1 kilometer from the Rwandan border. I used to go through Rwanda. And the capital, Kinshasa, is over here. And the second largest rainforest is in the middle. So it is very hard. I mean, it's difficult because of the infrastructure and the poverty, but even the natural barriers of having rainforest and mountains and difficult ways to pass through this geographic zone. This is the extremely rich resource. There's gold, diamonds, and every one of our technological devices has coltan. And it's columbine tantalite, and it's necessary in all technological devices. So we actually carry some Congo in our pockets. Child soldiers are digging this stuff out for $1 a day, often dying in the shafts because they're so poorly made. So when you think about what is going on here, I know we can't put the war down just to resources, but the resources are a very huge driver. There's 66 million people in the country, and half of them are below the age of 15, which is a really critical demographic when you think about recruiting child soldiers, which I'll talk a bit more about. All 9 bordering countries have been implicated in the reaping of the resources or the fighting between ethnic groups. All 9 countries have been involved. This is South Kivu, where I was, the province, South Kivu. And I always show this slide because, of course, it's very beautiful there. If it was at peace, you'd want to go there. This long white building is the UN Peacekeepers installation. They have had the largest deployment of UN peacekeepers in Congo ever. Now there's about 19,000 people there, and that's desk and operational people, the blue caps, coursing through the streets trying to keep peace. But even then, they have had a very hard time. There's been mass rapings 20 kilometers from their installations because it's very hard for the messages to come through. And I mean, the place is in chaos. But as well, the peacekeepers have been implicated in committing sexual violence. And also saying things at the local market. Several people have told me that the peacekeepers go there for a low job, and they give the woman a piece of soap. So, you know, really exploiting the impoverished. So there's a lot being talked about, but very few at the top of the UN has taken charge of punishing these breaches. So this is the road up to the Pansy Hospital, which served as my base. I think you guys might have heard of Dr. Mukwege. Yeah, he won the Olaf Palme Peace Prize, and he was up for the Nobel Peace Prize. He was my local supervisor. He's an obstetric gynecology doctor who is also the chief of the Pansy Hospital, the one hospital that does obstetrical fistula repair in the East. There's another large specialty hospital in Ethiopia. If the cases are too difficult, they get taken there. There's a large rainy season, so you can sometimes see how the road washes away. And several times, even while I was there, we couldn't access up to the hospital. So this is the kind of infrastructure you're dealing with. This is the road a pregnant woman would have to go up in a taxi or some way up there. And it's not that far. I mean, I think it was about 6 kilometers, but it takes more than 45 minutes because of the road conditions. You said this is a Forskare network?
Yes.
Yeah. So everybody's familiar with different research methods. So I just wanted to let people know that it was ethnography I did, and the hallmarks of ethnography is that you stay a long time at the study site. So I was there 7 months over a period of 4 years. Plus I had informants or people that I had made friends with, and they continue to still email me, call me, etc. to tell me what's going on there. So these were my embedded local people that helped me. Participant observation. You may do formal interviews and you may do informal interviews, conversations with people. But the nice thing about ethnography is when people say they do something, then you can watch to see if they do. And the local leaders had told me that the status of women was so low. And you know, so low, it's not that accurate a measure you can imagine. But when I saw how women lived, carrying 100 kilos sometimes on their back with these straps on their forehead, those who've been to Africa, maybe you've seen this style of bearing loads. They do that for about $1 US a day. And that involves also keeping field notes. I have some of these moleskin books, about 4 of them filled with notes. And the papers I wrote were built around the qualitative interviewing, and I interviewed local leaders, I interviewed child soldiers, and then I interviewed women, and I also got young women to write narratives, because some of them were very shy of recoiling in the interview, and I asked at the integration unit if these young women would like to write, because I wasn't sure about the literacy levels. They told me, oh, they'd love to write, and many of them had been to school. And I mean, one of the young girls, this is from her narrative, she drew caricatures of every part of her life. She color-coded the different rebel groups that had raped her or kidnapped her or that she had seen. It was a phenomenal piece of work that she turned out. The others wrote stories that were very interesting that added to this. I can pass this around. This is my PhD thesis. So just, I won't go into these, but just in qualitative research, when we're looking at these stories, these interviews, we're really basing a lot what we're looking for off already existing theories. So I told you about the new wars, the new way wars are carried out, where there's chaos everywhere. Different gender constructions, how the power dynamics play out in the field. Intersectionality is just it's another gender theory about we can't just call women women, we have to call them women with certain educations, with certain privileges, with certain geographical locations. So intersectionality just makes it really messy and says everybody's quite individual, so when you group them, remember that. And structural violence, that how did we arrive at this place in the world where so many people have so much and so many people have so little. So the structures that are functioning prevent everybody from advancing. And sites of resilience was something I came to at the very end because I was looking for, this is such a dire situation, how are people surviving? And I'll show you that at the end. There's a lot of ethical concerns when you work in a war zone about safety for the research group, but also safety for your participants. And we used to call MONUC, they're now called MONUSCO, this is the peacekeepers, call them every day to see if they knew where rebel groups were moving, just so that we would be able to not put people in danger. And the potential of re-traumatizing. Every time you investigate something that's been very traumatic for somebody, you have to worry that you might re-traumatize them. So we had a psychologist on backup in case we needed her to help this person after we leave. And research fatigue was a new thing for me, but it happened at the Pansy Hospital when people heard that that was the rape capital of the world, that it had an obstetrical fistula hospital. Dr. McQuagge was inviting people for help, and he was on the speaking circuits. Everybody found it. In fact, there were even people there doing sexual tourism, coming to see what does a place look like where rape is run. And this really happened. So I moved away from the hospital and I moved towards an integration unit because I started to see that we were taking all these confessionals and testimonies from women, and we knew a lot of the things that were happening. But what we weren't looking at is, who are these perpetrators? And I'm still very, very interested in who are these people that feel that this is something they have to do or something that they need to do. This is very interesting to me, but I couldn't go out into the rainforest by myself. So I engaged child soldiers who were in integration units as kind of a proxy perpetrator, because I knew a lot of them had committed sexual violence. So that's how I ended up with the child soldiers. But that's how research goes, right? You start somewhere looking for something and you may go in many different directions. As long as you're still following your aim, you find a lot of different things. So when I talked to local leaders, and they were from churches, NGOs, government, this is what they told me. Everybody's coming here to study women who have been sexually violated. That's just the tip of the iceberg. What we really want people to know is that if this woman wasn't rejected from her community, if she had proper health services, if there was safety and security so she didn't fear being raped once again and again and again, because many women go out and get raped multiple times, this wouldn't keep happening. We have to look at the other thing. The fear about HIV, because there is there's no treatments available there. The traumatization is not just to the person who has been affected, but the husband who feels that he has failed to protect his family, the husband and the children who have watched this rape, the father that has to watch his daughter being raped by soldiers, or sometimes he is forced to do something sexual with his children. This is multiple traumatization, not just to the victim who suffered directly. So this chaos of war, the defunct infrastructure, insecurity, etc., I think you're getting the picture that there's very little functioning. Many leaders said the only infrastructure that is functioning is the church. And the church does provide a lot of really important resources, particularly around health and nutrition centers, etc. But they also do damage because some of the ways they interpret the Bible, I'll say Bible here because there's 90% Christians, there is a small Muslim contingency and a small Taoist, the local traditional religion, but mostly people were following the Bible. So in the Bible, they were accusing these women of adultery because they've been raped. And I wondered sometimes if this was just a protective reaction because they couldn't look after them, so it must be something that the woman did. The poverty, inappropriate aid. I don't know if you've read some of these books on the market now, that there's a huge critique going on about aid. Because if aid has gone on so long, and it's so effective, why are things just getting worse and worse and worse in the countries that were quote unquote helping? That's another huge question. Global political economy, I'm talking about all these resources. We get them here. We get them here from Congo. And yet nobody knows how they get here. They only know that when you go there, child soldiers are digging them out. There's a really good documentary made by a Danish man, and it's called Blood in the Mobile. And he actually went and saw the soldiers going down into the mines, and he tried to go down a little bit with them, see what it was like. He was petrified. But it's a very good backstory for the abuse that's going on as we use the resources from Congo. The leaders said, we don't even think Africa's on the agenda. We know that Yugoslavia had a war and it was finished in 3 years. That's their impression, perhaps. I mean, there's a lot of things in the post-conflict setting, like what is post-conflict. But they really felt that there was a lot of inappropriate aid, but not what they really wanted. They want to rebuild the infrastructures. They want more security. I mean, they're even talking now about how Syrians are being invited to Europe. Congo's had this war for like almost 20 years. There's been that sort of relief hasn't been available for them. And then women's low status, as I mentioned, supported by the patriarchy, the church, and the culture. Even the church leaders said women's status is very low, but we get money from Sweden, so they say we need to put women in higher positions in the church. We invite them in, and they won't say anything because they're scared. So it's not just fixing the numbers. People have to know that they're worthy and they're valued and that they can use their voice. So it's not an easy fix, this low status. Now, that's about the leaders. And then I talked to child soldiers, as I said, and then I talked to women. I sometimes found it very difficult to explain to people what was going on by just using words. So I'm going to do a small reenactment. These are not my actual participants, but I created kind of sketches from what they said. And so these are made up people, but they're drawing on real life stories. I have a few resources there because this dramatization of the results is becoming more of a thing because there's so much information in the world and people learn a lot by something visual.
It's okay if you sit like here or yeah.
I don't usually talk about this, but I want you to know and I want you to tell everybody what's happening to us here. I know you said I don't have to tell you what happened, but I'm just going to tell you a little so you know what I mean. I was on my way to the field one day. I was just going to get some bananas for the kids. And then 5 soldiers met me. I don't even remember after the 3rd one went down on me. They said, give us your money, your cell phone. I gave them everything, but they still raped me repeatedly. I passed out, but when I came to, I managed to find my way back to my village. And my husband said, what were you doing there? You should have never been there. Get out of here, you wife of the rebels. I mean, he just doesn't understand. He kept our children and he was pregnant with her. He'd been in the hospital a long time. And I know it's not her fault, but sometimes when I look in her face, I just see the perpetrator. I relive the whole thing. I'm so filled with fear and rage. But I know it's not her fault. And the hospital's been really helpful in trying to help me be good to her. But now I have to live for her. She's the only one I have. But we're both HIV positive. And I just don't know what I'm going to do when the hospital says you have to leave. Yeah? So what do you want to know? Nobody wants to go to war. Are you crazy? I was on my way to school. Going to war was the last thing I was interested in. Some kids, yeah, they wanted to go. You know why? Because they got a pair of pants. They got to do something. They got some clothes. We live very poor, okay? Out in the rural areas, there's nothing. And I know a lot of guys are attracted because they just want to be in a group. And if your parents have died, who's going to be your group? No, I never committed sexual violence. No, I didn't rape anybody. Look at me. They told me I was small, I was a child, I didn't have to do it. used to pray with my eyes open, otherwise they'd beat me. I prayed, get me out of here. But no, I did not rape anyone. But I know why they do. If you are humiliated and you have nothing, you just want to destroy. Do you not understand? Child soldiers kill or be killed. Sometimes the muganga, he actually cut our skin. It was a bit uncomfortable at the time. Then he put herbs under. These herbs were amazing because then we could go to the front of the line and not be shot. And look at me, I'm still here. I went right to the front with my gun. Oh, the gun. I gotta tell you, we fell in love with the gun. The gun was our mother. The gun was our father. It could get so much more than anyone else could. But, yeah, but that was then. Let me ask you a question for a change. Do you have any kids? 2? I bet you they really. Okay. Just to recap now what I've talked about. Local leaders expressed a complex understanding of what's going on in their country. I was quite blown away by how many things they knew, but they felt they lacked the power or were not backed with enough power to do anything about it. The affected women suffered profound losses of bodily integrity, their children, their status in community, all these things that are so important in the collective that make them who they are. They lost all that. The amazing thing was how strong this mothering urge was that many women worked very hard to get over the fact that this was a child born of rape, and some had no problem at all. This was a gift from God. But still, they had no safe place to move or live. And once you're kicked out of the collective, the marginalization is good as death. So they needed to be at the hospital or with some sort of NGO support. These marginalized young men, their impoverished circumstances more or less thrust them into this. And once you've been militarized, it is hard to unmilitarize a child. But there's a lot of research being done around that, like how possible is it? Where can we find resilience in these young men? And what maybe used to be their rite of passage, that they would go out into the forest and hunt with the elders of their group, because of the chaos and the destruction of the fabric of the community, those no longer exist. So militarization is almost like now you're a man. It's replaced the normal traditional functions. So after all this, I wanted to know how were people surviving. So I call it resilience in the margins. So God and faith was very important. It was very important to this woman. It was very important to the child soldier, that they thought God would eventually help them and get them out of it. So prayer was some sort of release or relief. The fact that motherhood was so enduring. If there was health care and they got it, and they were cleared of HIV, their community sometimes brought them back. And there were a lot of different NGOs and churches working with mediation and negotiation to try and get communities to understand that this woman should not be rejected from the community. But there's not enough of that. Indigenous healers, I met a fabulous Indigenous healer, that he combined some of the herbal remedies that he used with taking first the survivor to the hospital. So he was using Western-based, evidence-based medicine to get her cleared of STIs. And then he was doing purification ceremonies. So this has worked very well in bringing child soldiers in Sierra Leone back to their communities. And if you kind of think of it like a cognitive behavioral therapy, KBT, as you guys call it, where you just rethink your traumatic events and try to integrate them So he would do these purification ceremonies where everybody would feel now it's a new life, it's a new start. So they wouldn't reject the woman. There's learning to do small businesses in some of these places that are helping with the NGOs. Some women turn to prostitution because they feel so divorced from their bodies, yet they want their children to survive, that they use their bodies to earn money for the children. And banditry. A lot of these young child soldiers are in the streets and they're creating a lot of problems in other ways, not necessarily warring. It's gangs, which is another kind of war. And so I found this sites of resilience model. And this was Payne, as a sociologist. He created this in Chicago because he saw that the criminal justice system was full of these poor black men. And he said, we're just saying that, oh, they've grown up in the projects and they're here and now this is their story. But he started to expand our view of them, to look at people who are in these circumstances as very complex people who have many different things going on in their context. Like some of the young men he worked with in Chicago actually were out selling drugs so they could bring money home to feed their sisters and brothers, because they tried to get jobs and they couldn't get them. So this is what I call resilience in the margins, because you're still in the margin. You're not allowed full participation. And I in no way think that women in Congo are like black men, street-oriented black men in Chicago. But what Payne was saying about let's expand the context and understand where these people are living, that was clear for both. So this is his, it's not a flow chart, it's more or less a mapping. So if this is daily life in Congo, your choice is to be militarized or marginalized, or both. So this is the way it works. If you meet an indigenous healer that takes you for health services, if your community believes in this traditional healer and he then holds a purification ceremony, he can help you return to your community. So these are called sites of resilience. Even when women, not just women, but families went to church and prayed, even though they're in a war zone, they went listening to the drums, singing, reading from the Bible. For the one day of the week that they were there, they felt like they were okay, because it's how you think it through. So the church can be very instrumental, but the church needs more information, because sometimes when a woman arrives at church and she has a flashback, she falls to the floor and she shakes, everybody goes, oh, she's got the devil in her. Because there's this very basic understanding, not of mental health, a good understanding of mental health, but more, this must be the devil. So very base understanding. Whereas if they knew that this was her reaction to trauma, they might be more helpful in this situation. So there are the individual conditions. So this woman, how has she lived? What is her collective? Has she been raped multiple times? Has she been raped once? The child, child soldier, where was he living? Why did he join? Was he kidnapped, etc.? And then the relational coping, very important in these settings, that you are part of a collective. Then the structural conditions, I talked to you about the colonialism, the dictatorship. We take for granted a nation state that will give us the drug when we're sick, when we have children, when we need help, right? Well, if you consider that for 100 years, no one has honored the Congolese citizens in that way. They have not had good governments. So that's all part of their history. And then the structural systems organizations like the churches, the humanitarian aid, the public health services, they also can either help or hinder by not understanding what's going on. And throughout all this, we always have to think about gender, ethnicity, and class, because that moves through all parts of this and every individual involved in the healing complex or in the people who have pathologies. So I'll just wrap it up now. Rape and its consequences are a result of many intersecting factors deeply embedded in social practices and power structures, from local to global. So even when we rape the land of resources, we are participating also. And this cannot be addressed in isolation. this is what needs help. We need to look. I mean, some scholars have actually said we live in a rape culture. So even in Sweden, when women cannot feel free to walk down the street, this is a rape culture that allows something that shouldn't be allowed. Sexual violence is not exclusively a Congo problem, but a global one. Strengthening and coordinating these sites of resilience wherever we can find them is key. So we're combining health services and religious organizations and indigenous practices, which a lot of people have been very hesitant to look at indigenous practices, thinking that they're backward and Western medicine is forward, when actually Western medicine is also a bit backward in that it's not always holistic in treating the entire individual. So we can take the best from both systems. Mass traumatization requires innovative and sustainable approaches tailored to entire communities. So it's not just the woman who's been raped, not just the man who's been raped. The community has been traumatized. And we need to focus on this perpetrator as a more complex individual. His gender, his ethnicity, his class, his life experiences that has created him as this sort of perpetrator. Children born of rape, where are they? Apparently there are a lot of them. In fact, some people said that some were dumped at the Rwandan border because the Hutus who came over after the Rwandan genocide are also living in the rainforest and causing a lot of problems in Congo. So some of the people that I talked to said that the children were left at the Rwandan border. I don't know if that's true, but even the idea of it tells you that this sort of animosity about where are these children. In some of the northern provinces, some of the children have banded together as gangs. Without any discipline, without any parental guidance, it's only a matter of time since these young people, who, if the war is 20 years, we certainly have adolescents that have lived only through war. And the critical analysis of how raw materials are sourced for global markets. We need to do what we did with fair trade coffee to conflict minerals. We need to go, whenever you want to buy a new technological device, you need to go and say, where are you getting the minerals from? And I have some slides. Yeah, I have some websites. There's Congo Calling in the UK, which is helping people fight against conflict minerals. And there's the Enough Project in the US, where you can actually download forms to send to companies to say, I want to know where you're getting your minerals from. I'm about to buy from. I guess I should have said that last line. Efforts towards peace, justice, and poverty reduction have to happen at the same time. So it's a huge order, but I believe, like Margaret Mead, the 1930s anthropologist, if you know her, she said that if anyone believes that a small group of people cannot change the world, think again, that's all that ever has. Small groups of people that get together and create movements. That's how our world has ended up where we are today. Thank you so much for your attention. Because I know
thank you so much for the presentation. It's so interesting. I was wondering about the kind of like practical implications if we think about the women and the women who are rejected from their families with their other children that are kind of due to rape. Are there any efforts of kind of reconciling the families or any kind of organization working with that?
Yeah, I mean, this is perhaps, this is something that the church is doing actually quite well, as long as the woman hasn't been removed from another part. But after you have got your medical care at the Pansy Hospital, there's 3 houses called Dorcas 1, 2, 3, and 4. They are places where women will stay, and they will learn a trade, and they will try to reconcile them with their family. The same within their integration units for boy soldiers. The main focus they look for is to find their parents so they can put them back together. The problem with that is sometimes the village is burnt down. So there is no geographical location for the collective. So, as much as they can, they are trying to do this because they see that the strength is in bringing people together.
Speaking also about we hear a lot of that there's a lot of conflict in the North Kivu region. How does it compare to the South Kivu?
Well, Bukavu, where I was last occupied in 2006. So that's a while ago, 10 years ago, but the war has been on for 20. I think the fact that Bukavu is 1 kilometer from the Rwandan border and the Rwandan border is extremely policed by Rwanda. I mean, Rwanda has been seriously implicated in causing problems in Congo as well, because they are the most densely populated country in Africa, and the UN has had countless reports. Yet the world isn't reacting with sanctions and things like that, because Rwandans almost like, wow, look at them, they've come back after 18 years, post-genocide. So because of this kind of geographic location, I think, and the peacekeepers are concentrated there, I think it makes North Kivu even more dangerous. And in the upper parts of the South Kivu province, they've had massacres, and they've had sexual violence masses, en masse. So North Kivu also has a very large hospital run by Heal Africa, the NGO Heal Africa. And I think that they, right in that area where Goma is, the capital, that things are a little bit more stable. But once you get out of those areas, it's such a vast country. And it's so interesting because I drove out to the plateau where all the fighting is going with 15 priests. I thought I was safe being with the priests. But it's so hilly. You can actually see women in the field. You can actually see soldiers coming. And there are certain villages that keep somebody on watch 24 hours. So they watch the hills and they watch to see what happens. And they actually have a word in their own local language that says we're sleeping in the woods tonight, which means we're not staying in our houses because if they're in their houses. And if you saw their houses, these adobe brick with not really strong doors. So what I'm trying to paint for you is a region of quite poor security outside of these areas that are less populated.
I have more questions. Should I go ahead? Or do you wanna, I can and I'm just thinking about now that you've done this, I know because I'm also in the, I'm doing my PhD now, and I see so many more things that I want to do, but there's not really the time or the money. So I've already have several studies that I'd like to do after this. You see all this research gaps and these. So how do you, when you think about your these 4 studies that you've done, do you see now that there's other, what are the research gaps that you feel like this is what needs to be done now?
Yeah. I think the biggest gap is looking at the perpetrator. And I'm writing an application right now for to go back to the reintegration unit and find out more about concepts around masculinity. Does it make you a man to do this? Does it, the stereotypes of violence and warriors, etc. Those sort of things we need to find out more. Who is this person who would do such a thing? And I have some of these theories around the fact that when you grow up in such dire situations, as I said, we have a nation state that respects us, that builds part of our self-worth. When no one helps you, you start to feel like, and don't forget too that the Hutus that came over after the Rwandan genocide, they lived in the rainforest. They have been living very base for a long time. I don't know what that does to your mind. I don't know what that does to your mentality, but the viciousness of the rapes is almost like you kill the giver of life, if you know what I mean, in kind of theoretical way. You think, oh my God, mothers are both feared and revered. But so I would like to find out more around how this person, does this person not see this? This could have been their sister, their mother, or do they see it and think that my mother didn't save me, she didn't help me? I don't know. I'm just theorizing, so this isn't anything I know. But I think we need to find out who this perpetrator is. And it's in other situations too, like in New York where they had a gang rape, they talked to the fraternity brothers, the fraternity members who felt like brothers, and asked them how they could gang rape this girl. And they said that, well, the researcher made these conclusions from what they said, but she said that they wanted to be friends with each other. This homosociality, not homosexuality, but homosociality, that you can be friends with your guy friends, but it has to be like a push, and you don't hug, and you know you're a little, this kind of standoffishness. But that they ejaculating in the same women made them feel connected, made them the peer pressure around, you know, following what your group leader said, made them feel more connected. Now, are young men so disconnected? This is something? Or is this just a special group of young men? But I think whether they're common or they're outliers, we need to know about that, because is this the way in a very individualistic society where people feel lost and entitled? Is this how they will play out their wounds?
Yeah, thank you. And
Yes,
I really hope we get money. The money for the
Yeah.
I thought about stopping the break. Do you think there's any progress for the moment? I mean, you describe how you can invite a lot of people there, and a lot of research going on, and also listening to him at Stockholm University.
Yeah.
And it seems like he's always very keen to bring people there and the world to know about them. And as you described it, also there's a lot of problem. So I'm wondering if you know anything about it, so we get to change this way of thinking, or
I don't know if things, because I haven't been there in 2 years at the academy, I don't know if things have calmed down in that way, because this was when it was called the rape capital. I think that he's like in the 60s, so he won't be able to do all these operations. He does fantastic work. He's done so many exceptional fistula repairs. He can really do it well. He has dedicated himself more to the talking circuit because he wants to raise the awareness. And when he gives some of his talks and they say, what do you think causes this? He holds up the mobile phone. He says, what do you think is in this? It comes from our country. We get no payback for this. We get nothing for this. And you people can be instrumental in that. I mean, I'm included in that group. I ordered a fair phone, but we have to start asking questions and then start the ball rolling. So his idea is that we can bring a few people over, and maybe people get bored and say, "Oh, that's died down now." I mean, it's a 20-year war. Nobody talks about it anymore. Do you see it in the newspaper here? Do you see any more information on the Congo war, which is still ongoing? And as I mentioned, you know, Rwanda is very implicated, and at the higher levels, nobody's doing too much about that. So I think it's important to keep it alive. I think his talking circuit is good. And he has brought people there who can help him do the surgeries, because there's so many surgeries to be done. I can't make a judgment on what works better or doesn't work better. I just know that he has had attempts on his life. He was left for Belgium several times. So he is one of these not brain drained. He went and got his medicine degree in Burundi, and he wanted to go back. Now, there are a lot of people who go out to get their training, and they say, I'm not going back there. So he's quite amazing that way. So he will not live forever, though, either. And especially if there's threats on his life, he will not. And he's so instrumental there. In fact, sometimes Kinshasa feels threatened by him because they see him as a political rising person. And he says, I don't want anything to do with politics. I want my country. You know, like he doesn't want to be the president. Of course, all this is politics. But he wants his country, for people to be aware and to start to react. And I mean, talking about the mobile phones and the technological devices, that's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be an evolution. But everything's an evolution. So why don't we take the slow evolution rather than the new evolution? Yes. Yeah, yeah. I grouped the women. I didn't separate the child soldier women from the women at the hospital because they're all survivors. That's why I usually say the boys, because I interviewed the boys at the integration. There was, of all the girls I spoke to, and there was probably about 35 in the unit at the time, and they're all looking after 40 children's minors. These are unaccompanied minors picked up on the battlefield, and they keep the unaccompanied minors with the child soldier girls integration unit so that they can be back. I only met one girl who actually used the gun. Most of them who had been with the child soldier, the rebel groups, were sex slaves or domestics or burden carriers, etc. But there was only one girl that actually was using the gun. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And those women who have survived the war, could you see difference between those who have babies if they have babies or able to survive in a easier way?
Well, like I said, yeah, because when you're rejected from your community and you lost all your your mutual children and your husband, it was amazing to see that this reason I have to live now for this baby. That was very strong, this motherhood idea. So maybe that also can be part of their healing process. That's the way it has to be. It's kind of bittersweet in a way, but it can be part of how they move forward. If there's support for those groups, yeah. Yes. Does anybody know Eve Ensler? She's a New York comedian. She does the vagina monologues. She did them for years. And then people started doing the vagina monologues. She survived cancer recently. She has built, right where we were close to the Cancer Hospital, you can see it over the hills. It's called the City of Joy, and it's as big as 3 football fields. And she wants to bring people there to train them. She teaches them small business. She teaches them on the computer. Even rural women who didn't have these opportunities. She does all these things in a 6-month program for them. The problem is they then have to go out into the world because you can't keep people corralled. And so they go out into the world, and then it's very insecure. I mean, Bukavu is growing because people, as I said for you, Bukavu is relatively calm right now. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen because Burundi is like 1 hour away, and Burundi is really heating up as well. So all the Great Lakes areas seems to be a lot of unrest. Maybe not where you are in Uganda. Yes.
Have you seen, when looking into the perpetrators, have you seen links of them to a greater extent being victims of sexual violence themselves at an earlier stage? Because in some topics we see that there are some researchers showing that there have been severely, we see that 80% of that once in the concentration camps have been victims of sexual violence themselves, and of course you can stop wondering when they get out from the concentration camps, they do what will they do?
No, you raise a very good point there, because it is in the literature that usually people who sexually violate, in many situations, have been sexually violated themselves. And some of the inculcation activities that are practiced, I know in Sierra Leone, they would dig holes and they would force the boys to ejaculate into the holes as practice. And in front of their groups as well. So those sort of things are very violent and very abusive. And then they go out and do these things. And when the boy soldier said to me, "Do you not understand? We kill or be killed." their repertoire of behavior is so narrow that was acceptable, that they wouldn't think not to do it, you know what I mean? But you raise a very important point, because these are cycles. And if we know more about that, can we break these cycles? Can we bring in health services that is very cognizant of the fact that these kids have been extraordinarily abused?
Sorry, one more question. I'm just thinking about, you said breaking the cycles. These integration units, who are they run by? Is it also the church, or?
The one I was at is not the church. It takes money from UNICEF, and it struggles year to year. And it takes some private donations as well. And it's not a huge one. It had 50 boys, and like I said, 40 girls, and then these unaccompanied minors. And their homes where they're living is not very nice.
I was thinking about this, you know, the demilitarization process. How a lot of these, as we looked, you had one of your slides,
yes.
And at the bottom was, I think, gender equality, or the
way that the state is.
Yeah, because I mean, we need to work there.
Yeah.
And do you know how it's done in the in these integration units? How they work with maybe, you know, the notion of female and masculine and gender equality?
I don't think they're there
at all.
I think they're there to a certain extent. For instance, the man who runs the integration unit, he's very, he's the boss, okay? So no one messes with the boss. And maybe you have to be that way when you have 50 boys who have some terrible things. You know, you have to. His idea of gender equity is sending the girls to school, which is very good. But I'm not sure in the individual connections that he's actually seeing them in the same way. But I don't know. But from what I see, it's very, very basic gender equity. You know, let the girls go to school. But still, the children are all put there for the girls. You know, maybe they wouldn't trust the boys to look after these young children when they've been so traumatized. I don't know. Maybe there are very good reasons for what they do. But I'm not sure. And of course, I think the school system is very much a French school system. Congo is a French-speaking country. And it's very harsh, the school system. And I don't know if it's evolved maybe how France's school system is, maybe with more gender equity. But I didn't see it as a huge advanced, very gender equitable setting. I mean, still the boys are putting their hands up in science and getting the answers. Because I did attend to So, I mean, we have a lot of work to do here on this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you look at places that haven't had the benefit of the knowledge or the tradition is so entrenched. Yeah.
When communities are rejecting women that have been raped, could you find any understanding on an individual level for the women from individuals within the community? I can understand that in the big community, this is the rejection comes from the community. But were there any understanding that this is a woman who has been really very.
Yeah, I mean, as I was responding to Amanda's question, there is a lot more going on with this negotiation and sitting down with people and reconciliation, you know, using those models of reconciliation where you need to talk and explain your story with a neutral party that says, hey, let her finish, let him finish, you know, so they talk about what's really bothering them. There was one small community 30 kilometers out from Bukavu where the young girl had had a baby. She was 16 when she had the baby, and her family wanted her to come back. So they convinced the rest of the community, please let her bring her back. She's a child. You know, there's this kind of pleading going on and all sorts. If people aren't too traumatized, because don't forget, people are so traumatized, they may not have rejected her under normal circumstances. But when you are living in a war zone and you're traumatized yourself, that you don't always make the sound decisions. So anyways, they brought this young girl back with her baby, and no one would touch her baby. normally attached. So it's like, okay, accepted is one level, but then, and she had to feed the baby because even the family says, that's what's, you know, that's a child of the enemy. You just can't touch the baby, but you understand. Because we're lucky you're here. We got the group to say you can come.
So she was still rejected.
Yeah. But she got food, she got a place to sleep, she had some of her basic needs met by this active acceptance. But then you want to wonder too, what does it mean to be accepted? They have names in the local language like snake, if you were fathered by a Hutu or fathered by a Congolese state renegade soldier. They had different names for people. So it's very much, you know, in the psyche that this is a war and that's a child of an enemy. And if you're traumatized, you see that child as a little soldier or something. And one woman once said to me too, she goes, I want to keep this child, but what happens if he grows up and part of his father? And so then you see the
I have one question. I had some problems with the technique in the beginning, so maybe you said this, I'm sorry. But
I hope I didn't jump around too much.
no, it was great.
I'm a Muslim person.
There was a scene with a boy soldier. He said that like he wasn't a perpetrator of rape, but did you also meet boys who talk like about having like being a perpetrator?
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah,
Was that like the most common story that they could speak to you openly?
of the 15 boys I interviewed, probably only 4 admitted outright.
Mm.
The rest would say, I don't want to talk about it, or my friend did it, or they didn't. But the boys who did say it, they said it in such a way that, are you kidding? I had no choice. I had to do this. I was going to be killed, or I was going to be. So none of them did it and say, yeah, of course, that's what I do. But that also might be how a child soldier would tell me. A rebel grown man might tell me differently. But as you pointed out, maybe some of these grown rebel commanders have come those ranks and been so abused themselves. Is it helpful to see the people?
It's very helpful.
Yeah. And sometimes when I tell the story, I say people don't. But it's true, I didn't understand this context at all. Like, I used to think bride price, which is practiced there. So, you know, if I marry somebody, I give some cows to their family. I used to think, well, that's terrible. That's like buying your life. But my driver, he actually was courting a woman for 5 years. They were members of the church, and they just were waiting to have enough money to have an official marriage, etc. And then when he was ready to get married, he said, now I have to, like, if I lived in the rural areas, I would give 2 cows to the family. But I live in the city, so I have to give them cash. So he was working for an NGO, and he was saving. And he said, it's not buying your wife. He was very adamant. We knew each other for a while, so we had all these discussions. And he said, she sells at the market with her mother. If she comes to live with you, her mother no longer has that house. So it's like an economic exchange, which is hard for us to think about here. The same way children are your insurance. We buy insurance policies, and for our cars, our homes, you know, our children in the playground and stuff. But they have children so that they will have someone to look after them later. They will have people who will help them farm. So it's a stretch to move from our own cultural context to understand how other cultural contexts work. Have you been to Africa? No? Okay. I was just wondering. You seem to understand a lot of the things that I was talking about. So,
yeah, I've been quite a lot spending some time in Asia. And
you recognize this cross-cultural,
the cultural context
Yeah.
But it's important to take that into consideration this time that
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and in Asia, it's how strong the mother-in-law is, that I've heard. They may have low status as women, but once the mother-in-law becomes the mother-in-law, she can be a tyrant, because it's almost like she lived this oppressive life, and now she has a chance to impact the family. Yeah. So in different contexts, it plays out in different ways.
Can I just ask, you're talking about the women and not being accepted in the society. What about the boys, the soldiers? What would happen to them? How would the society look at them?
They have an even harder time with them, because it's not like they can just be cleared of sexual transmitted infections and then they go back to their old selves. They've been exposed to such violence that they're afraid of them. So the integration process is a long one. I mean, they stay there supposedly 3 months, but some boys have been there 2 years because they can't find the family. But I would say, from what I read too from other scholars, is that the trusting of these boys is very dangerous. No one wants to trust them, because they might have even been the child soldier that came to your village and they saw you cut somebody's arm off or do some terrible things. So that's where in Sierra Leone they use the traditional healers to say, listen, this person's living. I'm also very interested in the men who have been sexually violent. There is up by where close to Uganda, where you are in the northern, where the Lord's Resistance had its stronghold. It's moved now. They opened a clinic for men, and then it took a long time. For a couple of months, they had 6. Now it's been open for 2 years. They had 76 men. Because first of all, you have to know it's there. Second of all, you have to get over the shame that you've been able to penetrate it, which is apparently a very big shame in this society. And you don't want to share it. So there might be a lot of men out there who have been violated that don't need to be sharing that information. And there's very good services for them. I mean, there's very little for women. Unless it's a child and then the parents. Is that good? Any last questions? Yes. Yes.
What happens to them as they grow up? Because eventually they have to be, in some sense, part of society.
Yeah. Yeah.
But maybe they're not old enough.
Yeah, by now we would have seen adolescents coming from this. New York. There's a lady in the United States, Charlie Carpenter. She has really championed this area, and she's trying to find out more about it, but very little research is done in this area. It's like they become invisible. And when I heard about this group that are ganging together up in Shabunda, one of the villages in South Kivu, that they're just hanging together as kids with no discipline, so I mean they're robbing, they're doing all sorts of things to try to satisfy their needs. And you gotta wonder what kind of child that would be after so many years without any sort of basic needs met. No loving family, no supportive community. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for letting me
Fair cake, chocolate for you.
Ooh,
It was a very interesting seminar.
That was so nice of you. Thank you very much.
Research network and we will have a seminar later this week too, so I'm not sure what the topic is going to be yet, but we can have you can take our Facebook group, you will see